Hey, how are you doing? Welcome to episode 25 of the NOTCAST. I think today is the 28th of November 2020, and today I was originally going to be talking about what life was like 25 years ago in the dim and dark years of 1995, but I'm not going to be doing that on the grounds that I'm not that interested in it, and I suspect you aren't either. Today I'm going to be talking about the U2 debut album, Boy, and there's going to be lots of stuff which I'm going to throw at you in terms of information, and this is probably going to be the start of a series where I talk through every single U2 record that there is. I will not rush it, and I will not do a series of 15 videos about every album that they've done and every single or anything like that, or at least not in a row, because I would get bored, and I hate to think about how bored you would get, going, oh God, it's another episode where Mark talks about U2 again, endlessly. But we have a good reason. Since today is the 28th of November, it's relevant in three ways, I think, to history. The first one is that today, or maybe yesterday, the 40th anniversary edition of the band's debut album was released on vinyl, white vinyl, for Black Friday. It seems to be there's a record store day every month at the moment. I'd like to point out that every day is record store day in my world, and it should be in yours as well. Also, today is the 27th anniversary, if you want to mark anniversaries, of the broadcast in the UK of the Zoo TV Sydney TV special, which was broadcast on Sky Television the day after it happened. So I recorded it. There was a 90-minute cut-down version of it, but it was my life, and I watched it endlessly until it came out on DVD. Also, it's the 5th anniversary of the last Dublin show of the Innocence and Experience tour. This is a t-shirt that you could buy at the Dublin show. The front is there. Looks familiar, doesn't it, guys? And also, of course, I'm wearing another copy of exactly the same t-shirt. They sold a different colour t-shirt every night of the shows in Dublin. I think they sold green, orange, white and grey, and I have white and grey. And I must point out, probably the fact that this t-shirt looks better than the others is because white t-shirts generally have a very short shelf life in my world. Never take them to gigs, never take them out anywhere that I'm eating, because I don't want to ruin the shirts. So I wear a lot of black. Practical reason for that is, if I go to a gig and someone throws a pint or something around, if it gets into a black t-shirt, it's not so noticeable as if it stains. Other thing is, I love eating foods like lasagna and spaghetti, and sometimes that's how they happen. But you're not interested in that. Why are we doing that? I'm doing that thing that YouTubers do, where they talk endlessly about childhood memories while you just go, oh, come on and show us the recipe, guys. Show us what's really... And I could just, some people talk like they're paid by the words. I know I do. And I should probably stop. So let's cut straight to it and talk about U2's debut album, Boy, which came out yesterday on white vinyl. So to start off with, by the way, probably give you a little bit of history. U2 formed in Dublin around 1976, had the same lineup all the way through. Nobody's left, nobody's been fired. A couple of people have missed a couple of gigs for health reasons. Larry missed some early gigs because of work commitments, but generally, in fact, I think the only guy that's played at every U2 show is The Edge, actually. Adams missed, a show. Bono missed a show. And Larry obviously missed some really, really early ones back in the early 70s. But that's not really the point, is it? The point is, 4 people, same lineup all the way through. Lots of bands go through their careers with mostly the same lineup. Rush, after I think John Rutsey left in 1974 and was replaced by Neil Peart, had the same lineup all the way through to the end. REM have had the same lineup apart from when their drummer Bill Berry retired, and then they split. I think Depeche Mode have had the same 3 core members since 1979, with the exception of one member who left in 1995, and Vince Clarke, who left the band in 1981. Now, you might think, well, yeah, that's all very interesting, but very few bands get to have exactly the same kind of lineup all the way through. And what I'm going to do is to talk through the band's early years before we get to the album, and then talk about the album and the associated singles that come with it. So, Boy was released as the album in, I think it was September 1980, maybe October. Hard to believe this is 40 years old now. You can buy copies of this cheap as chips around about 1991, 1992, because as with any band, they have a shelf life. And lots of bands find that they tend to really struggle about 20 years into their career. So it's a thing that's really affected Depeche Mode and The Cure and other bands. So when you're young, I was young once, you're listening to a band a lot and you kind of think, this band are brilliant. And then all of a sudden, you get mortgages, you get slacks, you get a moustache, you get, children and the space in your life where music's sat. Sometimes you kind of think of music as being something that's childish as opposed to something that keeps you in touch with your inner child. And so when Achtung Baby came out in 1991, had a very different style and a very different sound. There was a huge backlash actually at that time, and lots of people were like, I don't like U2 anymore, they're not the band that I fell in love with. And so therefore, lots of people were selling off their old records, which is great because around about 1991 was the time I really got madly into U2, and so therefore I could pick up all of their albums, singles, all their bits and bobs relatively cheaply. And it may seem staggering to think that, Achtung Baby turned a lot of their fans off, but that is what genuinely happened. A lot of people were fans of hats and haircuts as opposed to Trabants. And certainly when you listen to Boy, you can't think, oh, that band are going to go and do Achtung Baby in 10 years' time, or they're going to release All That You Can't Leave Behind in 20 years' time. Really unexpected. So they didn't come out fully formed, though. They didn't come out fully formed with the first batch of songs that they released as absolute genius. That wasn't the case at all, I'm afraid to say. They recorded a lot of songs and released a lot of songs before they really hit their stride. And by the way, you may not necessarily know this, Boy is available in 2 cover variants. So this is the version that was released in most of the world, and this is a version that was released in America and some European countries. This is an American edition on, I think, Warner's. Oh, hang on, no, Ireland, Atco, Warner Communication Company. And if you look carefully at the sleeve, what you'll see is actually the pictures that are on the back of the LP here are these pictures, but they changed the sleeve, and around about, I think, 1990 or thereabouts, all of the editions were standardised, so they all had one cover. So I don't think any versions with this cover were published after around about 1990. I'll just check the CD edition here of the American version of the album has the warnings which they quickly took off CDs after about 1989. That tells you that the music on this compact disc was originally recorded on analog equipment, and we have attempted to preserve as closely as possible the sound of the original recording. Because of its high resolution, however, the compact disc can reveal limitations of the source tape, which is a nice way of saying we didn't put any effort into remastering it. We just bunged for example, some of the original David Bowie CDs, when they were first released in the early 80s, were taken straight from cassette masters. So those were masters that were prepared for cassette release, not for the LP release. And they just put those and stuck them onto a CD. There's a whole world of debate around which remastering is better. If I really run out of things to talk about, I might mention that. So, U2, starting in 1976. I think this is a photograph here in the book U2 by U2, which is from one of their first shows, which I think is at the Mount Temple School. I could be wrong. I think it's been scheduled for demolition recently, actually, which is pretty odd considering all the things that go with it. So, Boy released in 1980, the band had been going for 4 years, and they'd written something like 40 songs by the time that Boy came out. So there were a lot of songs that they recorded and demoed and had broadcast on the radio and performed live that aren't on the album. And I think we're going to talk really bluntly. Some of those songs were not very good. It was the sound of the band having a voice but not having found their voice yet. So, if the only album that U2 had ever made had been Boy, it would have been, hailed as a post-punk classic by a band that possibly could have been as good as Simple Minds. I'm sorry to be so blunt about it, but they didn't really show anything at this point that really demonstrated that they were going to go on to the artistic and creative and commercial kind of potential that they later fulfilled. This sat next to a lot of great post-punk albums. If you bought Boy, you probably also liked Magazine, Pill, Simple Minds, The Alarm, Big Country, all those type of bands. And if you want, a word of warning about what happens if you're not very good, well, frankly, I'm going to upset you if you're a fan of Simple Minds or The Alarm or Big Country. That's the band that U2 could have been, had fate not intervened. But their early material wasn't particularly good. And they started off with some demo sessions in April 1978 at Keystone Studios in Dublin. And they recorded 2 songs, Inside Out and Night Fright. I think both of them are circulating in very small fragments, about a minute and a half or so. They also apparently worked on a couple of other songs called Concentration Cramp and Hang Up, but they were never finished. No one's ever heard them apart from the people that were in the band themselves. And in 1978, in November 1978, they recorded their second demo tape. Now, their second demo tape was released digitally in 2004. On this release here, U2, the early demos, which says that it's their first recording sessions. It isn't. It was their second demo session, and they released 3 songs there. One is Street Missions, the other one is Shadows and Tall Trees, and the third song from it was The Fall, and they were all released on a 2004 iTunes digital box set. And hang on a quick moment, I should have done this before. They are not on the 2008 multi-disc remaster of Boy Girl. So the only place you can get those, unless they were on the medium rare and remastered fan club edition CD, was from iTunes. And I think there's a couple of things that are notable about that. Firstly, Street Mission has the longest edge guitar solo in it. It's about a minute and a half long. He never did one that was longer in the whole of the band's career. The second one is the track Shadows and Tall Trees, is the first song that they wrote that they put on their debut album Boy. It's the first song that they wrote that they later released. So it's the oldest U2 song that there is. And when I listened to Boy this morning, it was also my least favourite song on the album. I think the two might be related. And in February 1979, they went back into, I think they went into Eamon Andrews' studio, and they recorded Another Time, Another Place, which was later released on the Boy album, The Magic Carpet, Twilight, Alone in the Light, and False Prophet. I think you can find all of these versions on YouTube, by the way, so just go and have a listen if you want to hear what early baby U2 sounded like. Now, of those, Another Time in Another Place was released on Boy, and Twilight was also released on Boy, but also was in the B-side of a single. So they're starting to, by the time that they're something like their 8th or 9th song is something which is on their debut album. So they're starting to write songs. They're starting to find a voice around that. And in August 1979, they recorded 4 songs. They recorded Out of Control, Stories for Boys, Boy Girl, and another version of Stories for Boys. And this is where it gets perhaps a little bit more interesting, because all 4 of those recordings were issued. Now, to most people in the world who are over my age, I think is probably the nice way of putting it, this is the first U2 single, in the days when they hadn't decided whether they were going to be called U-2 or U2, I think, and there was still some debate around what they were going to call themselves. So this is the 3 EP. This was pressed many, many times between about 1979 and 1985, at which point it was quietly deleted. CBS Sunburst label, I don't know whether this is a rare version or not. It hasn't got a picture sleeve on it, so it's probably not that rare. but it is one that I could afford. Now, it's only very recently, in the past 4 or 5 years, I've actually bought a lot of the early U2 singles. Primarily because I was limited by money and interest, actually, and I'll explain why. Is that, the early stuff I never really loved, and if the only album that U2 had ever made had been Boy, I wouldn't love that band as much as I do, and I wouldn't have as many records either, because I didn't release that many records. This is a 12-inch single version of the 3 EP. I think it was only available in a CBS sleeve. I could be wrong, but again, Sunburst logo, U-2, side A and side B. So these are, the first 3 recorded U2 songs that the vast majority of people got to hear, and they're very good. I mean, Out of Control is a fantastic song. They've played it live as recently as 2015. I've seen them play it many times, and it's a banger, to put it technically. If it was the only thing they'd ever done had been this Out of Control track would be appearing as a great lost gem on post-punk compilations between now and the end of time. And the Edge would probably be a scientist, Bono would probably be the chief executive of an Irish charity, Larry would probably be driving motorbikes, and Adam would just be a cool fruit who works with books or something, I don't know. Now, that EP, also, they recorded a 4th song during the sessions for that EP, which was Stories for Boys. It was an alternate version of Stories for Boys. It was released on a compilation album called Just for Kids. It was also released on the 2008 remastered version of the Boy album. And I think when they released a 40th anniversary edition of the U2 3 EP earlier on this year, I think they used the version for the Just for Kids version. So if I'm correct, if I'm wrong, I'm sure someone on the internet will tell me, because that's what the internet is for. The version of Stories for Boys that's on this is not the version of Stories for Boys that's on this. And what you'll see is, they've tried to replicate at least the feel of the original release, although obviously they're not on CBS Records anymore, so they can't replicate the exact logos and bits and bobs that go with it. That first 12-inch and single was, quite rare. When I got into U2 about 1987, it was expensive, it was hard to get, it was hard to find. You couldn't find a copy for under 20 quid. I didn't have 20 quid, and especially not for a U2 single. I didn't have 20 quid for a U2 ticket, let alone for a U2 single. So that was a very different world then. And at this point, the band was still on CBS and still only releasing records in Ireland. This is the 2nd single. This is Another Day. It's not very good. I don't think they've played it live after about 1982, and I can't say I'm really surprised. What it does do, though, and again, this is a version without the picture sleeve on, because the version with the picture sleeve is too expensive for me. It's not been reissued, it's not been repressed. I think it's on the Boy remaster. Yes, it is. It's backed with a version of Twilight that was recorded, I think, maybe February 79. And the version of Twilight, by the way, they couldn't find the original tapes for it, so they have had to master the version of Twilight from the B-side of this 7-inch single, or another copy of this B-side of 7-inch single. Another Day is, I think, following on from Out of Control. Another Day follows a similar kind of approach, and you start to see a couple of the U2 trademarks in here. You start to see the use of the repeated echo in the guitars. You start to hear the use of a soaring pre-chorus vocal from Bono. So when Bono's singing, for example, and you'll hear this pre-chorus vocal on Electric Company as well, is that when the chorus kicks in, he'll just wordlessly just kind of croon a vocal melody before he then goes into the chorus. I can't sing as well as Bono, so I'm not going to, although I'm sure you'd probably enjoy it if I did. Now, the third release that they had was this, which was a 7-inch single called 11 O'Clock TikTok, backed with Touch. And I think Touch was originally called Trevor. Now this, I think, was released in, I should have written that down somewhere, I think around about May 1980. It was recorded by Martin Hannett. And it's more of a Martin Hannett record than a U2 record. If you listen to Joy Division's Unknown Pleasures and Closer, and you can hear the sonic production kind of tricks that Martin Hannett has put into that, then you will hear those tricks here. You know, the use of big drums that are recorded in strange and unusual places, like at the top of a flight of stairs, and weird and unusual textures that are in there. So it's more of a Martin Hannett record than a U2 record. And I mean, if I can be really bitchy about it, I don't think that there's a brilliant studio recording of 11 O'Clock Tick Tock that exists. I wish there was, and the band have played it live as recently as 2015, although not very often. It's a great song, and it's a song that wasn't on Boy when Boy came out. Since we are in the 40th anniversary of the Boy period, they also released a 40th anniversary blue vinyl 12-inch version, first 12-inch edition of 11 O'Clock Tick Tock. I think this is transparent blue vinyl with 2 previously unreleased live tracks recorded at the marquee, being Touch and Twilight. So that's an unusual choice, but not an unwelcome one. So where have we got to? So we've got to, the band played a show at the Dublin National Stadium in February 1980, which I think was the day that they signed to Island Records. And the Dublin National Stadium is not as big as you think. It's a boxing hall. It probably has a capacity of maybe 3,000 people. I think it was where Morrissey played his first solo concert in April 1991. I was surprised by how small it was when I saw a picture of it. I thought this was bigger. But, you know, for an unsigned band to be playing there to 2,000 people, it's pretty impressive in 1980. Obviously, there are some bands that are absolutely huge in their immediate local area that don't necessarily always translate. And I'm kind of thinking, you know, for example, the Stone Roses in 1989, absolutely huge in Manchester, couldn't get arrested in, for example, you know, couldn't get arrested in Birmingham. They played Walsall Junction 10 to about 80 people, I think. And so they signed a deal in February 1980. And in February 1980, around about this time, they also recorded a number of other studio songs. So they recorded Trevor, The Dream Is Over, Silver Lining, which is an early version of 11 O'Clock Tick Tock, I think, A Day Without Me, and Jack in a Box. And I think some of the live songs from the National Stadium in Dublin are on the Boy reissue. So, for example, I think there's a song called Cartoon World that they never recorded in the studio that's on there. And I think there's a couple of other songs as well, which you'll see various B-side versions. If you can find a recording, by the way, of U2 at the Dublin National Stadium, it is available on the internet. It's a professionally recorded and mixed version of the show. One of the earliest U2 shows that there is in existence, and certainly the best full-length U2 early show that you can find. Go find it, have a listen to it, and then go, oh my god, I can't believe they went into the band that turned into make, you know, the Joshua Tree 7 years later, and Acton Baby 12 years later, and still writing and recording to this day. So after they played the show in Dublin, I signed a deal with Island Records. They recorded a number of extra songs and went into the studio and released their debut album Boy in, I think, September or October 1980. But before that came out, there was this single, A Day Without Me, which they haven't played live, I think, since about 1985. And it staggers me that they haven't played it live since 1985. It is a brilliant song. It was the first early U2 song that I listened to, and I thought, this band have really got legs. They're going to go places. You know, I listen to it and you can start to see in 11 O'Clock Tick Tock and A Day Without Me, you know, the band that they're going to become. You know, the first kind of embryonic steps that version of the band are taking. Now, the cover of this, by the way, was shot, I think, at Booterstown railway station. I have been there. That bridge, I think, has been replaced and doesn't exist anymore. Wonderfully evocative photograph. On the back, by the way, the B-side is a track called Things to Make and Do, which was the first instrumental that the band played live, and it was the only instrumental the band played live until 2010. And I think they played it as a kind of like to give Bono a breather after he'd been yelling his heart out. It's a great fun track. It's a bit insubstantial. You know, it's the nearest thing the band came to a jingle. Although what you can hear is when you listen to that is, you can hear the interplay between Edge, Adam, and Larry, and they're starting to learn and develop their own musical language. I read some pretty bitchy comments about the band's early demos, saying that the rhythm section wasn't particularly good. I don't think the band were ready to record when they did their first demos in 1978. They were probably very nervous, and that affected their ability to deliver. But the band did kind of expand upon that and become quite confident and assured. So we have October 1980, the release of Boy. Here is the white vinyl edition. And I think this is one of the better debuts from the period. I think it suffers a little bit in its sequencing, but the production is confident, the performances are assured. The songwriting is variable, I'll be honest about that. So there are some songs on here that are not amazing, and there are some songs on here that are very, very promising that the band still play live until very, very recently. So the track listing on this is I Will Follow, and a lot of people think I Will Follow was the first single from the album, and it wasn't, because I Will Follow was the second single from the album, and there it is, with using an alternate shot from the same version, same sessions. And then this chap here is a guy called Pete Rowan, who was a friend of the band, and still goes to the shows these days, and he later turns up on the covers to a couple of singles and a couple of the albums as well, which I think we'll touch upon in due course. But I found that Boy was a confident but not perfect debut album. I think the sequencing is quite hesitant, so it opens very assertively with I Will Follow, and then it goes into Twilight and a Cat Dubh, Into the Heart, and Out of Control. And I think that what it does do is it misses a trick, because it's got a fairly that's the cat opening the door, by the way. Cat's very clever, hasn't got a job, lives here, eats the food I pay for, manages to open the door and get out and about. What I was hoping for is that the album would be perhaps a little bit pacier to start with. So in the version of the playlist of Boy, which I've made, it's I Will Follow, then A Day Without Me, and those two songs are thematically linked because they're both about death, and then there's Electric Company, and then Twilight, A Cat Dubh, and Into the Heart, and that closes out side one, and then you start side two in the version I like to listen to, with Out of Control, Stories for Boys, Another Time, Another Place, Shadows and Tall Trees, and then you end the album with The Ocean. And The Ocean is still a song that the band played live as recently as 2018. So the first leg and a half, the first part of the Experience tour in 2018 in America, and also in the first part of the European leg of the tour, they played The Ocean near enough every night. And I was lucky enough to see it, and it sounds amazing live even now. What I'm really pleased about is when the band choose their set list, is that they're still pleased and they're still proud of the early material. Now, some of these songs haven't been played live since the early 80s. I think Another Day was last played in 1982. A Day Without Me was last played in, I think, 1985, or maybe 1984. These are really strong songs, and A Day Without Me is a fantastic U2 song that they should be playing live more often. But I Will Follow is a song where Bono is singing about the early death of his mother, and wherever she goes that he will follow. And it's almost like not quite a suicide song, but it's a song about wanting to follow your mother when she died and you were young. Now, A Day Without Me is a song that apparently was influenced by Ian Curtis's suicide, which it wasn't, because it was recorded and it was played. I think it was played live definitely before that, before May 18th, 1980. But it was obviously released on the album not very long after that, so it came out 4 months, I think, after Ian Curtis died, and it was being played live before then. So it's not about Ian Curtis, but it is about suicide. Now, naturally, when you're very young, you may be 18, 19, 20, and you're creative, one of the things that you are, because I was a miserable teenager once, is you're generally quite glum and quite miserable, and the idea of changing your life dramatically does cross your mind, if not in practical terms, then at least thinking about it and going, would it be better if I wasn't here? And I think these are some of the themes which this album touches upon. The other thing I will mention actually is A Day Without Me, and I mentioned it a couple of times already. It's such a great song, but it's a huge influence on Pill. So Pill, for example, are a huge influence on this album. So I think is it Keith Levine, the first guitar player in Pill. You can hear the Edge listening to early stuff by Susie and the Banshees, early stuff by Pill, Television, Magazine, Buzzcocks, those type of bands, and turning it into his own sound with the use of the Gibson Explorer, and I think is it called the Memory Man Echo Box, and then using the Echo as almost a second instrument or a second guitar part. It's a really interesting approach to playing guitar. Nobody else has quite used that approach, I think, as successfully as the Edge, in much the same way that Peter Hook from New Order and Joy Division has a very unique bass sound. You know when you're listening to him playing his instrument, you know when you're listening to the Edge playing his instrument, and he's created a much thicker and wider sound through the use of the echo. And what's odd then is when you get to Acid Drops, which is a track by Pill on their album That What Is Not from 1992, is that you can listen to A Day Without Me and then Acid Drops by Pill, and you can clearly see that song has influenced Pill. So the influenced becomes the influencer, which is a very 2020 phrase indeed. Thanks to the rise of Instagram and TikTok and all those other social media platforms with thingammy-doodahs. But listen to the two songs and you can go, actually you could play a medley where the two would fold into and inside and around each other, and you wouldn't be able necessarily to know which one was written by Pill and which one was written by U2, because they're very, very similar songs. Both very, very good songs. So A Day Without Me, which I know I've been speaking about for what feels like about 14 years, great U2 track. And in fact, most of the songs on this album are really, really strong. Now, I would change a couple of songs if I had the ability to swap and chop and change songs out. I think I'll take Twilight off, and I think I'll take Another Time, Another Place off, and I'll probably add 11 O'Clock TikTok on. Now, that would make the album one song shorter, but it would still be a 10-song album. It would sound a lot more assured, I think, and because Twilight and Another Time, Another Place and Shadows and Tall Trees are the earliest songs that are on this album. Taking some of the earlier songs out would make it sound more like U2 than it does, or sound more unique than it does. I'm not trying to be harsh on the album. I will never make a debut album as good as this, and it's one of the best debut albums of its period. And it lays the groundwork for where the band went next, but you wouldn't necessarily, by listening to this record, think, oh yeah, that's they're going to go off and headline stadiums in a few years' time. Now, as I mentioned, this is the alternate cover for the album from the early 80s up until about 1990. And this was the cover of the album that was used in America and some European versions of the country as well. This is the American edition. I bought this because of the cover. In fact, I've never bought a copy of Boy brand new on vinyl until yesterday, which is pretty surprising, isn't it? But this I prefer this cover, actually. I think this is a better cover than that one. Now, far be it from me to tell artists that they're wrong, but I have opinions. If I didn't, I wouldn't be doing this, would I? No, Mark, no, you wouldn't. But I prefer this cover, and this takes the 4 photos that are on the back of the LP, and someone has put them into a photocopy machine and stretched them and bent them around and used mirrors and all that kind of stuff to do it. And it was done on the cheap. But this is the not remastered version of the album with the inner sleeve, which has, and also actually, by the way, if you listen to, if you pick up the earlier albums, depending on how boring you want me to get, these are actually pressed on much thinner vinyl. In the 70s, late 70s at least, during the oil crisis, a lot of records were pressed on quite thin vinyl, and record companies realised that they didn't have to print them on bigger, thicker vinyl until relatively recently. So when people say, oh, it's 180 gram vinyl, and most people go, well, yeah, that's great, but all it really means is that the record itself is a bit thicker, whereas original vinyl editions you could bend and flip like frisbees, They were very fragile and got broken very easily. And because this is an original inner sleeve printed on very cheap paper from 1980, I've put it so that it goes in sideways so that gravity doesn't eat a hole into the side of the disc, which, as you can see, it's already done before this copy came into my possession. Okay, so what happens next? Well, CD editions of the albums were released in the 80s. Again, this is the original, I think, Island Records first CD issue. Nice bit of water damage there. This is the American version. Again, as you can see, even the typography on the back is different between the two. This one is lowercase, that one's capitals. And in the days when they still had the Island Records things on the side. I prefer the version with the 4 photographs on the front. Now, I'm not a fan of pictures of millionaires on the front of records, but they weren't millionaires then, and it's a good cover. And here is the I Will Follow single, which, as I've mentioned previously, came out after the album came out. So lots of people think, oh, I Will Follow is the first single from Boy. It isn't. It's the I think it's something like the third, actually. And it's backed with Boy Girl, recorded live at the Marquee. Now, live at the Marquee is a pretty important show, actually. Primarily, the reason being is that Live at the Marquee also was released as a double 10-inch live album, recorded on September the 29th, 1980. This version was released by the band's Fanclub in 2015. There's a double 10-inch. In fact, I don't think in here, alongside a spoken word piece by Bono, where he talks through his memories of the show on side 4. Never actually played it. Probably should do, actually, but I've never played it. I've listened to the MP3 version that comes as download. And with U2's fan club issues, that if they're releasing archival material, they tend to use the dominant format from the time when that was released. And vinyl was the dominant format in 1980, so they used double 10-inch as the dominant format for this. The Joshua Tree 1987 and 2017 10-inch fan club release with live material, because vinyl was the dominant format in 1987. They used that version, but then the 2018 Live at Berlin DVD is on DVD. Probably should be on Blu-ray, but that's an entirely different conversation. Now, the band also released a promotional live album, which was recorded live in Boston. Some of the B-sides, or a couple of the tracks from Live in Boston, turned up on this, which is the Sweetest Thing single from 1998. But the whole show, I think, was made available for download. And then in 2008, as part of the band's reissue program, which is still ongoing 12 years later, they released a 2 CD version of Boy in a book. Oh, that looks familiar, doesn't it? Alongside pictures, notes. So, for example, some of the sleeve art that they originally had, interviews, album covers, and pictures from various early sessions. Now, on the second disc of this, by the way, oh, that looks familiar. On the second disc of this, there's quite the treasure trove, actually. Although the band are very sparing in what they release on their reissues. There's the full live show from Dublin Stadium, which isn't on here. There's a number of other live recordings, TV broadcasts, which aren't on here or aren't released as DVDs. But there's an unreleased version of I Will Follow, which has got an extra bit of acoustic guitar on it. There's a studio recording of Speed of Life. There's a track called Saturday Nights, which is on here as well. 30 seconds of Saturday Nights was appended to the end of the album as a kind of secret, hidden, fade in, fade out song right at the end. There's the EP tracks. There's a live version of Boy Girl from the Marquee, which is on the B side of I Will Follow. There's a previously unreleased version of 11 O'Clock Tick Tock from the Marquee. Don't know if that's the same night as the one that's on the double 10-inch over there. And then there's Cartoon World live at the National Stadium in Dublin, which isn't perhaps quite as big as you might think. So that's a talk through the debut U2 album, Boy. I think I'll be doing the other albums of theirs and the other releases there sequentially in order as and when. I'm not going to leap around the chronology, I think, but I'm certainly not going to do 15 U2 videos in a row, because you're going to get bored and I'm going to get bored as well. So in conclusion, we have the U2 debut album recently released on lovely white vinyl. It's the first time I've bought a brand new copy of Boy on vinyl, as I've mentioned previously, which comes in the original and now definitive sleeve, not this version. You can still pick this up. Makes a lovely addition to your collection. Plays really well. I love it to bits. And as I've said, I think it's a great debut album. It's got a couple of, I think, what I regard to be, I would have made different decisions in the track list, but that's what MP3 players and playlists are for. But that gives you an idea of, the 40th anniversary edition on white vinyl of Boy by U2, which was released yesterday. Yes, it's still sealed. I haven't played it yet. I will do at some point, but I've had it for less than 2 days, so be gentle with me. I will come back to U2 again and lots of other bands as and when I think about things. I have been asked about my thoughts on The Mandalorian. I'm sure I'll get to those at some point. And as you know, I've got plenty of opinions and a huge amount of time, because everything is shut and there is nowhere to go. On this Saturday night, by the way, I think I would have been seeing No's Atomic Dustbin at the Powerhouse in Camden Market, but now I'm not, so I'm doing this instead. In another world, pre-COVID, right now, I would probably be sweating quite a lot during the last song of the show, which might be song 11, would take forever, and thinking about, I really need a drink and an ice cream. And to be honest, I still really need a drink and an ice cream, so I'm going to go off and do that now. It's 28th of November 2020. Thank you very much for paying attention. And also, of course, it's the 5th anniversary of the last of the IE shows of U2 in Dublin. So again, I'll talk about that at some point in the future. Thank you. Questions, comments, let me know. Put it in the comments box. I will see you again soon. I'm off for something cold and hopefully some ice cream. Bye.